a lot of people coming in because I checked online, there were like 5 people who RSVP'd. And I said, well, I guess we'll have a very small personal workshop then. But with more people in the room, the first thing that I really want to know, and I'll get into the presentation when we're actually on time, but why are you here and not somewhere else? Anybody want to tell me what they'd like to get out of this session?
I got stuck being a webmaster for a librarians group at the school, and they have a WordPress site. I have no idea how to do it.
Okay, awesome. Yes. More. Tell me.
Say, I am actually I'm webmaster for a couple of different things, none of which use WordPress, except actually the chorus that I'm involved in, and I know very little about it. So hopefully I'll be able to apply it to other areas.
Excellent, sure. Yes?
So the legal services programs in New York City are using WebKit, and the lawyers are able to use it in Webkit.
Excellent. That's really good to hear.
I'm director of an incubator program, and we have a website that requires updating with WordPress, and I'm going to be the person.
Okay.
Plus, all of the lawyers in the incubator have been learning to blog and learning that blogging is important for their practice development. So.
Absolutely. We have an incubator program at Chicago Credit, and I do a workshop for them. I don't force them to use WordPress. A lot of them have found other services they like, but I do tell them if they're using WordPress, they can stop by and we'll show them.
Oh, you're right.
So I have a presentation I can share with you that's more strategy on setting up a website that might be useful for your incubator. Anybody else? What do you want to get out of this?
Trying to find out what's current with WordPress since I haven't used it in years.
Okay.
And it's unclear, is this just WordPress in general, or is this the WordPress that's offered through CALI?
I will cover generally, because one of the things that I think is very important, as we heard at a session that I just came from, is choose the tool that fits the purpose. And there may be cases I use, and I'll get into more examples, but I think I put into my profile for this section. I'm running currently a WordPress site for my brother's wedding. I am running a WordPress site for my food blog, one for just the stuff I put online once in a while, personal blog. It's not updated often. I have set up a WordPress site for my church. I've set one up for a nonprofit organization that does education in Sudan. I've set one up for our community garden. We ended up moving away from the community garden one because it was set up to be, it was a little more complex on the user side and I couldn't support it anymore just with my time. But it was set up using BuddyPress, which actually lets you create like your own social network and all these groups and things. But I was having to put in all the members myself because nobody wanted to do that. And I just didn't have time, so they moved to something else. But it has a lot of flexibility. It's open source, which means that the upfront costs are not high, and I'm going to show you a few ways that if you really enjoy getting into the guts of it, you can do it with very little risk. You don't even have to pay for a service at all. You can run it on your computer. So there's a little context. I hope that hearing from other people the cases that they want to use it for is helpful. I'm happy to get into examples of how I'm using it as well. So just to give a tiny bit of background, the WordPress timeline, it was created in 2003. It was created as blogging software, so by default, in most WordPress sites, what you'll see is the latest update at the top. They added in plugins, which let you extend the functionality pretty early on in version 1.2, and then pages, which let it work more like a CMS, which has been customized extensively since then. Image uploads, obviously, that's a pretty key thing for most websites these days. Great, I need to turn off Twitter. Just a moment. Okay. Sorry, I'm used to interface things on my Surface. Okay. WordCamps are a community organized way of getting training on WordPress. So if you really get into WordPress, they're cheap as heck. I help organize WordCamp Chicago, and the cost has ranged from $30 for a 2-day conference to $60 for a 3-day conference. They're organized all over the country, and the content varies according to the organizing committee. We've had years when it was very developer heavy and years when it was very accessible to newbies. So you really want to contact the organizers. of anybody who's done it in your area if you're curious to see if this would be useful for you. Since I'm on the organizing committee for WordCamp Chicago and have been since 2012, I try to represent the newcomer's perspective and say, some of us have a good sense of technology but haven't dove into something like this before, or some of us become intermediate and we're not developers, but we do want to learn how to do little tweaks and make it work the way we want. And WordPress, fortunately, has a very supportive community, so those are great if you want to keep going. So widgets, tagging, admin bar, customizer, autosave, things like this came out. WordPress, according to the annual presentation called State of the Word, in fall of 2014 was running 23% of the web. That's not of the top 100 websites, that's of the web. That's millions and millions and millions of websites. So you can feel pretty confident that if this is something you're using for a community project or for an educational, professional, whatever, there's going to be examples out there that you can go to. These are the tag cloud that I pulled from their showcase, so those links are in here. And I am going to, by the end of the presentation, show you how you can get all of this information that I'm using. But if you're starting from scratch, or even if you're working with an existing website, I think it really helps to take a step back. It doesn't require any technology at all. It just takes some time to think about it. Come up with a content strategy. There are some great books out there that talk about content strategy for the web. Someone I've met through WordCamps is doing content strategy for WordPress that'll come out soon. So it's worth paying a little bit more attention to something like this. I'm going to go into some detail on this type of content strategy. Types of websites, you'll find so many different examples of people going in different directions. Figure out what works for what your abilities are and what your content is and how much time you have to develop. All of these things, who will manage it? WordPress can be very collaborative, but if you can't get people who are really willing to step up, then you might want to limit how much access people have when they're getting in there so that they don't fiddle around with the site and do things you don't expect. Fortunately, it comes with very specific user roles. There are different types of content, and of course, it's always important to know your audience when you're setting something up. Don't just think about how it will work better for you on the back end, think about how it will work better for them on the front end. So, I'm going to go into this very briefly, and again, you'll have access to all this information pretty soon. These are just some screenshots I grabbed. So, by default, a blog or news magazine type thing is going to be super easy. You'll find tons of examples. That's how WordPress started, so you won't have a hard time finding good examples and getting going with that. You can do that on any of the free services and beyond. If you want to set up a static website, that's also just fine. This content that I'm putting in here is not really intended to turn into a blog at this point, but it works. Portfolios, a lot of artists use this. You might find reasons to do something like that even academically with documents. A lot of our faculty members have come up with ways of setting up a fairly static site that has a lot of other content they're bringing in. Now, if you want to do something more, I mentioned early on my community garden, I set it up as this membership social site. That's a heavier workload. It required some customized tools. I couldn't just put it in any of the free sources. I had to put it into a custom host in order to do all these add-ons. Learning management system, there are more tools out there to do that. Some of those systems you have to pay for at the beginning, or you might be paying for services over time. And e-commerce, there's a ton of people who are using it to sell stuff. To go back one step, you hear the word WordPress, and then it gets a little more confusing because then there are two different flavors of it. There's WordPress.com, which is where anybody can go and sign up for a free site, and there's WordPress.org, where anyone can go and download the software. But downloading the software has to go somewhere in order to use it. When you download it to put it somewhere, you can also add in whatever else you want. When you're on WordPress.com, they limit what you can put in. So it's fine, it makes it simpler, but some of these other things, it's difficult. The company WordPress is actually run as an open source organization, but there's a company behind it called Automatic, which is founded by the guy who first wrote WordPress. And they're the ones that actually have full-time staff. So I'll mention Automatic from time to time in this presentation, just so you have a sense of these are the ones that are actually going to be supported long-term versus who knows who out in the open source community, which nothing against the open source community, I think it's great. But if you focus, if you see that term Automatic, it's spelled with two T's because his name is Matt, then you'll have a sense that this is really funded actually, compared to some of the other ones. One thing they just did was they purchased the biggest company out there that was creating a commerce add-on. It was called WooCommerce. So the company is always looking to see where the open source community is developing WordPress. And if it sees like, this is a great tool that everybody's really latching onto, he might start to say, hey, I want to bring that talent into the company and we'll officially support it. So there's a possibility, I don't know if any of your use cases would involve asking for donations or payments for events or even buying products, but at some point in the next year or two, I wouldn't be surprised to find that even on WordPress.com, people could start to set up sites where they could have payment systems. There's a lot more development going on into that. And think about this already runs 24% of the web, and a lot of those are on free sites. What would that mean if anybody could set up a business like that? This is a really interesting development to me. It doesn't have that much to do with what I'm doing. I've never set up an e-commerce site, but I do think it's interesting to see who's going. So, again, who's going to manage it? Yourself, another person? Are you going to be delegating writers and editors and wanting them to put content into it, but you want to manage it? Or are you going to have rotating staff or students? That can be challenging because then you might have a buildup of people over time that are no longer accessing the site. And what do you do if you want to get rid of them and clean it up? So I run student org websites. I did a presentation on that last year. And one of the things I did was I chose to give them kind of generic logins. And this is just for your whole organization. You manage who has access to it. I will limit your access to the live site so none of you can break it. Only I can make changes. You have a test site where you can do whatever you want. I don't really care. I don't have backups. So thinking in terms of that, maybe it doesn't make sense to give everybody their own personal account if they're going to leave pretty soon. Maybe you want to do it by role and just simplify your life in the future. So types of content. Again, text content is pretty straightforward. I have some things in here to think about. Most of us have read on the web long form versus short form things. Sometimes you've seen specialized content. I run a recipe website because I like to cook, and sometimes people ask me for recipes and say, stick it up there. There are ways that you might even want to have that optimized so that when you search for recipes on Google, you can sometimes say, I want one with this ingredient in it. That's an example of specialized content. Or let's say you're setting up a website for your firm and you want to be able to have reviews. That was something that came up with the ABA Tech Show this year, is more and more people online are depending on reviews to judge the accuracy of something. And there's specialized content that makes those star ratings show up when you search for something. So that's the kind of, I've seen something cool out there, how do I get to that? Versus just, I'm going to put this in. Maybe even forms would be a kind of text content where anybody can enter stuff and it'll come to you through the website. I helped our local Chicago Association of Law Libraries transition their monthly, or I guess it's quarterly newsletter from being a giant PDF that they were spending like $3,000 getting formatted to being a WordPress site. To me, that was a no-brainer. Obviously, it's regular content that comes out in articles. This fits perfectly into a kind of blog sort of format. The major challenge was because everything had always been formatted for a PDF. If I was grabbing from the PDF and it had weird line breaks in it, I had to go find the Word documents. Copying from Word, I don't know if any of you have ever copied something from a Word document and put it on the web. Sometimes you get weird formatting. So we had to figure out a workflow for that to speed up our time uploading content into a different format. It worked eventually. One thing I wanted to do though was edit it for the web because there were a lot of really long paragraphs. And I don't know about you, but if I read a website and a paragraph is something I have to scroll through to read, I leave. It like hurts my head after a while and I have too many things taking my attention. So here's a great tutorial I recommend called Writing for the Web from Slate Magazine online. It's great because it actually demos how people read while it's written, so it's a lot of fun. And if you're writing new text, who's going to be writing it? And do you need to have some kind of editorial workflow? That can really help if you're bringing in a lot of people. Multimedia content, this is pretty obvious. Images, obviously I've got images in here, that works great. Documents I've mentioned, some people want to put up PDFs or Word documents or PowerPoints or something like that. Those are easy to put in, but by default it will only give you the link to the document rather than displaying it. I have some plugins which are add-ons that customize it, so you can't use plugins everywhere. Sometimes you have to go find another service and embed it using that. So I've seen people And the same thing for videos and maps. You're usually going to be embedding something that exists on another service, whether it's Vimeo or YouTube or Google Maps or something like that. So even for documents, you might want to think, how important is it that people can preview it? I set that up for student journals because most people, if they have to click on a PDF and all they see is the title, they're not going to get that interested, especially if you have like no text and no abstract, no information. They're just going to be like, oh, that's just the title. I don't know if it's interesting to me. A little bit of a preview visually can really help. Audio, it does have an HTML5 audio player in it. Of course, ClassCaster is customized to do all kinds of awesome things with audio, so if that's really what you want to do, you should definitely look into that. All right, so we've talked about that. I mentioned before knowing your audience. This could involve choosing a design that makes it easy. If you have people coming back all the time, they may depend more on easy navigation so they can see a lot of information about your site right up and go to the section they want to go to. It's like a membership site or something where people are going back for different reasons each time. If it's something where you really want to introduce yourself, like a incubator's firm website, they might want to have something that highlights, this is me, right away, introduces themselves. Responsive design is important because Google is changing how search engine optimization works. They will ping your site as a negative if your site does not work well on a phone. And especially if you're doing something like setting up a firm and trying to make sure your name gets out there, you don't want yourself getting knocked down in search engine rankings just because your site doesn't work on a mobile device. You want to do everything you can to make sure your name is right there at the top. When we set up the bulletin, we wanted that to be accessible because we figured some people might want to read something on an iPad if they're going through a lot of articles. Accessibility issues. I'll talk about which themes to choose. One thing to look into if you think that there will be anybody who has eyesight issues. That could be anyone who just has glasses. I don't love sites that have tiny text, but there can also be other things where you need it to be visible to somebody who doesn't have eyesight at all. So knowing that that's out there and filtering for that, again, this is just strategy. So before you get started, before you choose ClassCaster or custom rolling your own thing, these are the things to keep in mind. I'm going to assume nobody really wants to do any of this. But it's what I do for my job. It's not that bad. If you need to do it, I'll have lots of tips on where to go to speed it up. So some of you that are now responsible for managing sites might find some of these things coming to you. But if you do not want to download backups, install updates, review security, or do search engine optimization at all, then you should definitely consider managed hosting. So here are your options for free managed hosting. WordPress.com, like I mentioned, offers free sites. They do offer paid upgrades. So for my food blog, I paid for a custom domain. That cost me less than $20 a year. That's not a big deal. And some of our faculty members are on there. They just wanted to be able to manage it themselves, and that's all they really cared about. It does come with ads, though, because that's how they pay for the free stuff. So if I didn't want ads, it's an extra $30 a year. Still not that expensive, especially when you compare hosting it yourself. ClassCaster.net, of course, is completely free to CALI members, but you can't use it for your community garden because that's not a CALI member. Edublogs.org is another one that is set up to offer free hosting for people. So if you know somebody at your university who wants to get into this, but isn't a member of CALI and wants to do some things that are more focused than just WordPress.com, that's another free one. It also has paid upgrades for specific purposes. I haven't ever used edublogs.org. I have used all of the ones at the bottom, the roll your own. So WordPress.org, like I mentioned, is free software. You download it, you can put it somewhere. If you really want to play with this and see how it works without breaking anything or having to pay anything, that's what local installations are for. So that's actually what I'm doing right now. This is a WordPress site that you're looking at, and it's running on software on my computer. So I use Desktop Press, which is a service that has a very simple installation process, and it provides everything you need on the back end in order to install WordPress. That's what all these acronyms below mean. So when you see XAMPP, WAMP, MAMP, etc., those are the software stacks that you need to run WordPress. So basically, PHP is the code files that run the themes. They handle the design and the way that it looks and runs. MySQL is the database. That's where all your content lives. Because your content is completely separate in a completely different system, than your design and functionality, that makes it very easy to switch things out as much as you need to. If you want to really get technical, all of those things are installations that you can put on your computer. XAMPP works for any type of computer, Linux, which is what X stands for, Windows or MySQL, the other ones, or I'm sorry, Macs. So WAMP is for Windows, MAMP is for Macs. Desktop Press will work on any of them, and it has a paid upgrade if you want to. If you're just getting started, you can do the free version. It lets you install like 3 websites on your computer so you can try different things. And then if you want to get more complicated, if you want to do multi-site, or you want their help taking it from your computer and putting it onto a live server, they have a paid upgrade for that, which I think is really smart. I've seen them highly recommended by a lot of people who just want to make sure their lives are a little easier to use. School servers is what I do. I actually run it on Windows servers, which, as you will see, all that A stands for Apache. I run it on a Windows server which runs IIS, so I wanted to run that a WIP server. Sounds kind of like what a lot of developers would say when they find out I'm running it on a Windows server, but that's what I have. Vagrant is for people who want to do virtual servers and really play with a lot of different options. That's for developers. I do not consider myself a developer at this time. I'm kind of vaguely, slowly moving my skill set in that direction, but Desktop Press does what I do. And paid hosting. That might be what all of you with these existing community projects are using. It might be on WordPress.com, it might be on a paid host. If you're on a paid host, there are some concerns, especially if you ever run into problems. So I have a bunch of tips on questions you might want to ask. Mostly, cheap hosting means that they've got a lot of websites running on the same place, so sometimes there are security issues. We used a very well-known host for a while for my community garden, and after a while something got into the back end. Every friggin' link on that site was going to Russia. I don't know why. It just ended up somebody, and I don't think it was anything in our settings that got infected, but some site that was running on that computer, that server, got the infection in it, and then it started reinstalling it. So I'd be sitting there at work, downloading the files that got infected, re-uploading clean ones every hour until we got it cleaned up. I finally just moved to another host, because if they don't have good security settings, there's not a lot you can do. So it's definitely worth asking some smart questions before you put all your time into that. All right, you're set up, you're ready to go, you have some sense of like, I can deal with a free site, that's going to be fine, or I really want to play with it myself. One of these fits my interest level. What you should do, and again, this is not a technical thing, this is just a practical thing. Take notes, really. It will save yourself so much trouble. Take notes as you choose a theme. I like this one for this reason. I'm doing this for this purpose. I tried this setting. Here's what worked for me. Here's what didn't. If you do that, it'll make it easier for you too, if you ever pass this on to somebody else. Make it easy for them to use, because it is a system on the back end to learn. And the more you do this, the more you're reinforcing for yourself, I did this for a purpose, rather than I was just kind of futzing around clicking boxes and I didn't know what I was doing. If you do get into customizing code, do comments in your code. That way, if you change a color or something like that, you can be like, this changes this thing for this reason. And then if later on somebody says, oh, our logo has to change, you can go back and find, like, this was the logo, and here's what it was before. Save backups. Even if you're running on a free host, you can usually export something. So if you do that once in a while, you'll feel better knowing that you can play with this. And also, saving exports makes it easier if you decide to customize it on a local site, just to start playing with it. So those of you that have existing sites, you might even find that useful. If you're like, I want to dig around in the back end, but I don't want the live site to be changing all the time. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to pull an export, I'm going to set up something on a different service or on a local computer, and then I can just change everything, and it won't matter. I run everything on a test server and a live server. They're completely separate for that reason. When I'm training people, I want them to feel free to build, but I don't want them to break the live sites. And I found that that really gives our students peace of mind. And the process for this is not hard when it comes to transferring. What not to do? Please, 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 don't do this. Don't edit the core code. The core code, if you're downloading WordPress, is anything that isn't in the content folder. The content folder has the things that you customize. Anything else beyond that, you are highly likely to break or make your site less secure. I have a site that I've been asked to support but I don't really know how soon I'm going to be able to support it because somebody went in and changed the default login screen to go to a paid service. But as soon as they did that, every time you upgrade, which you want to do so that you get the latest security patch and the latest new features, if I downloaded an upgrade, and this is like, I think 4 years out of date now, which means that's a security risk, it would break all of the stuff that they set up. It's for a journal, and that's where they put all their subscription information. And it actually isn't even working, so people can subscribe, but their subscriptions never expire, as far as we can tell. So the journal has not had any income for a few years because there's no renewal notices going out. So that's kind of a nightmare situation, and I don't work with the external service that does all of that, so it's very hard for me to step in and fix it. If they had figured out an alternative service and done it the standard way of adding their own customized plugin to do this purpose, it would be a lot easier for me to go through that and be sure that I didn't have to go find another file that had been changed. Especially when I'm dealing with ones that are years out of date, I don't look at files that look like that. And editing your themes directly, talk about child themes, they're huge help. It's a built-in feature that lets you write your own little bits of stuff that you want to customize for the design, and it'll go back to the parent theme for any instructions that aren't your customizations. Core features. I will go through this relatively quickly if all of you have seen anything about the back end. Has everybody seen the Backend of WordPress? I don't want to spend too much time going over things you've actually seen. And again, I will provide all this information to you. So, posts and pages. Posts are the updates that show up at the top. Pages are the static content. They can be organized in a different way. The dashboard is the editor. Settings are where you can make site-wide changes. They tend to be fairly simple and not a whole lot of detail. The media library is where you can upload all of your documents and images and then reuse them however you need, so you don't have to be tied to one specific thing, but in one place where you can get a global view of it. And user roles, I've already mentioned, are very helpful if you want to make sure that different people can look at it, but they can't all do the same thing. So, posts versus pages, I kind of went through that. There's a few things that are worth paying attention to. They're pretty much all, I'm going to get out of this and show it to you in detail. So you'll see things like tags and categories that people use to organize when they have a lot of updates and they want to kind of group them so that you can filter it and only see the updates in one area that you're interested in. If you have multiple authors, it's helpful if your design actually shows a link to the different authors so people can find more things written by that person. Post formats vary. We're using one for, we have a Institute on the Supreme Court of the United States, and they've done a lot of videos for that. So we added a different format for the videos so people could look just at the videos if they wanted to see those. So that's another way of filtering it that can be helpful. This right here that we're looking at is a page. Let me go back to post versus pages thing. So one thing for you to notice is as soon as I went out of that anonymous view, I'm logged in. Can you tell how you know I'm logged in? Yeah, there's an admin bar at the top. That admin bar is a fairly recent addition. I think it's super helpful. I love it. Whenever I'm training students, this is what I show them because they're not necessarily going to remember a whole new interface. They want to look at their site and see what they can do. So what shows up here will vary according to where you are in the site. This shows me a lot of my kind of global options. The new shows me what I have permissions to add, which is pretty much everything here, because I'm an admin, which is the top level. And then edit page gives me a really quick way, so I don't have to scroll all the way down this page to see if this design has a link. If I can go in here and say right away, oh, I wanted to show you what this looks like in the back end, just click on there. Now I'm in the back end. The back end is called the dashboard. It's really, people get a little weirded out by the fact that it looks completely different. I tell people it's about as easy as writing an email. You write your subject line, you write your content. The biggest thing to pay attention to when you're working with posts and pages and you want to see the full functionality as a beginner is this publish box. I tell people to really take a close look at that because it gives you a lot of options that will make your life easier. So this has already been published. If I accidentally published it with half the content broken, I could click on that and I could switch it back to a draft. And then it would be saved on the back end, but it would not be visible on the front end. That's extremely helpful if you're working on longer content or you're importing something and you're not sure it works right. Anything saved as a draft by default, when you create it, it's always saved as a draft. You have to click publish. It won't ever, by auto-saving, show up on your website. And it's that ability to save as drafts on the back end that's what makes it easier to have different types of users, because the most restricted users can add drafts but can never publish. They just don't even see that function. Visibility for this one is public. They have more options, and this is available for both pages and posts. So you could set something to be public, you could set it to be password protected. That could be useful if you have a quick tip that you want to give to only a certain group. You can send them the link and the password in the email and say, hey, as long as you enter this, you'll be fine. Some of our faculty have sites that they've set up and they want certain content to only be visible to their students. So we just use that, and it's very easy. Or private. Private means that anybody who wants to see it has to have an account on the website. So again, you want to think through whether you actually want to set up accounts for people. If people are not going to be there long term, you might never want to use a private one. That password might be better so that they don't actually have to remember a username and a password and all of those things. But if you want to set up something that's only visible to other editors of the site, you could use that to put in your policies for how to edit this thing. And that might be useful. It'd be published and it could be linked to, but other people wouldn't be able to see it without those access rights. Say okay on that. All of these open up after you click on the link. I have a lot of revisions on this, but I fiddle with things. I can also change the published date. If I want something to be scheduled, that's where I would go. So I posted something to our library blog. I drove out here, so I left Friday after work, and I scheduled a post to go up on the library blog on like Tuesday morning saying, hey, check out all the Chicago Tech people who are at CALI. I did not want to have to try to figure out if I could do that from my grandmother's internet because she used to have dial-up, and that was not going to happen. Fortunately, she has everything fine now, but I wanted to be able to spend time with her and not be thinking about, oh, it's 10 a.m., I need to get something live on the website. So all of those things, I think, are the kind of usability that just make things work for people. And a lot of people don't spend that much time looking at those options, but I really think that will just make your life easier. So go back to visiting the site. So we just looked at the dashboard. I'm going to see, oops, if I can do this now. So these two up side by side. So I can give you kind of an outline of what we're going through and point at it as we do it. This takes me a second. So you can see I'm using Chrome, and I've got that little spy guy in the top corner to prove that I'm in incognito mode, which is a very useful thing if you want to check out what it looks like to a visitor as opposed to you. Just in Chrome, you can go in there and say, say Control-Shift-N or incognito mode. And I'm looking at it as if I was somebody else. So the full dashboard I showed you. One of the other things, actually for this one, I'll go ahead and go back to it. Switch this out. Good. I'm using a responsive design right now. You'll notice that when I resize it, it looks completely different. That's very helpful for accessibility purposes. It would look fine on this. It would look fine on an iPad. It works even though I'm on a projector and the screen size is not large. So let's see. I'm going to go look at the dashboard. I showed you the admin bar. I showed you some other sections. One of the things up here you want to look at from the dashboard, they give you kind of an introduction thing when you set up a brand new site. It's very helpful. It shows you the basic features. So I'm going to go ahead and close it after I show it to you, but it has like, go here first, and then here, and then here. So I think it's very helpful. They always think about users. So when you create a new site, it kind of gives you that quick checklist of these are the things you definitely want to look at. If I make this full screen, I have more space over here for this menu that leads me through all the different options. When you set up more limited users, a lot of those buttons disappear. So when I set up students, they can't get to things like appearance or plugins or tools or settings. All they can see are their content things. You can also click on collapse menu and it becomes smaller. So if you're spending a lot of time writing and you don't want distraction, they've tried to focus on how do we make the back end as simple for people as possible. One thing people don't necessarily pay attention to that they should, again, I'm just kind of showing you the menu because I think it's helpful. If you hover over things, when you're in the back end, that's where it's really helpful to do bulk editing. So if you hover over it, you get quick edit. So this was a draft I accidentally created. I meant to create it as a page, and I put it in post just because I clicked on new too quickly. I can go in here and I can delete it. When I delete something, it gives me a chance to undo it, which is helpful. So again, it's very hard to break the site. And once I click delete permanently, then it's gone. And it gives me a reminder that, hey, you just did that. So quick edit lets me do things like check off different options. I could change right here, hello world was the default. Maybe I want to say introduction instead, and click update. One of the other things that I can do when I do the full edit and I'm on this screen, if I have a lot of boxes around here that I'm not using, and it just seems like there's more stuff to look at, I want to remember the things I want to use, I don't want to see everything else. If I'm not using categories or tags that often, but I am using a featured image, I can drag and drop here and make that box, and as soon as I do that, it's going to remember it every time I'm editing this type of content. It will put the boxes in the order that I did. So sometimes I do that when I'm working on a multi-site or a multi-user site. I'll go in as them and be like, these are the ones you have to remember. Let me show you how to clean this up. They also have at the top of the screen something called screen options, and I can uncheck anything that I'm not using. Once in a while, you might find a design uses something like an excerpt, which shows a short blurb about the post on like their homepage. You might want that if you have a lot of content coming up and you don't want people to have to scroll through long posts. If you choose something that uses one of those features, screen options is important to know about, because if your theme depends on those options and doesn't turn them on by default, you might be tearing your hair out going, I want it to look like the example. Where do I put that information in? It's gone. It's not here. It tells me, like, it shows me a screenshot and I'm supposed to have a box that says excerpt and I don't see it anywhere. Well, screen options, you would just go up there and check that box, and then it will magically appear below here. If I'm not often going back to undo my previous versions, I could turn off revisions, knowing that that's still built in, but just make sure it's not in front of me. So screen options is a turn on, turn off, simplify my life kind of tool. All right. Back to reverse these so that one that isn't in there, I'm going to go, come on. That's my outline here. There we go. The one that is in edit mode can be bigger. All right. So, we talked about that. Core features. Again, I really think it's worth getting to know all of these things. The dashboard. Basic settings are things that you can usually get to from a page up here called Customize. Customize is a relatively new introduction as well. You'll notice that the site gets smaller as I'm doing that. It lets me preview changes. So if I decided, and I did this before you guys came in, that maybe I wanted this to have a dark background. That's built into this specific design that I have an option to change it. And I could fiddle around. Do I want it to be dark? Do I want yellow? Customize it further. I'm using purple right now, but it has a light and a dark and all these other things built in. It also has things like my site title. I can just type that in. A lot of these things you might do once on installation, but if you're coming back to the site and you ever find something like the site got installed and you look at it and it says underneath the title, just another WordPress blog. How do I get that text out of there? Use the customize. It's a field in there. You could find it in the settings. I find customize a lot easier to go through, and I always emphasize that when I'm training students. So they don't have time. They don't want to go through a whole backend and figure out, remember where that thing exists in the navigation. If you play with WordPress a lot, you'll find the dashboard is more powerful than customize. But if you're just trying to quickly customize something, it is what it says. Some sites these days use other things, or have in the past used things like site settings that exist only in the dashboard and not in customized, but because WordPress is finding that this is just more user-friendly, they're telling designers, you need to use this. And some people are like, but I wanted to add 10 million features to my site and you're ruining it. And they're just like, maybe you shouldn't do that, because usually those sites run really slow and they're actually kind of a pain if you ever want to move to another design. And they're like, yeah, but I don't want people to move to another design. And they're like, sorry, we want to go with the user on this, not you. So if you do find that you have a crazy complicated site and it's really hard to manage, chances are good it might be something you have to go digging around in Appearance and find a settings page, and there you'll find like endless checkboxes and stuff. Again, if you're finding your site is just too much to manage, do the export, try it somewhere else. See if you can change the design and simplify your life. So, basic settings, I showed you some of those things. The media library, I will leave this page. It always wants to be like, are you sure you didn't want to customize all those things? No, it's just demoing it. Right, hamburger menu, right. So at this point, I have two ways of viewing this. I can do this, which shows me a lot of information, or I can also do this, which lets me preview all the different images I put into here. I can click on them, I can rename them, I can search for them by type or date. All of that is very helpful if you're going to be putting a lot of stuff into your site and you want to reuse it. Especially for our student journals, it was very important that they rename the files so we could find them. It will just make your life easier. Oh, oh. Back to user roles. Whoops, that does not look good on a tiny site. I decided to add a table, guys. Not always a smart thing if you want a responsive design. So, I also, because not everybody likes reading a table, especially during a presentation, I put the same information there. So there are different types of users, and if you look just at the X's across there, you'll see there are types that have very little access to something. So a subscriber can't do anything but set up their own username profile. That's it. They can't see anything else on the back end. A contributor can mess with their own posts, but they can't ever publish them, and they can see comments and stuff. So it kind of scales up naturally. So, themes of a design. I showed you some of the things built into this, like changing the color very quickly. What are your design goals? I already mentioned before when I showed that example of different types of sites. Some of them have a lot of images, some of them have a lot of text, some of them are quick to scan through, some of them really only let you see one thing at a time. Keep your design goals in mind when you start choosing a specific layout. So, I like this as an example of something that pretty clearly had explicit goals. They wanted to get a message across about who they were, and they wanted people to do stuff. So this is something that I found on the WordPress.org showcase. It's from an organization called Ladies Learning Code. It got cropped a little bit, but it says, this is who we are. And then it says, sign up for our mailing list, here's how to get tech help, and here's how to do events. So it has different types of content. It makes it really clear what they are in the beginning. You can go to this page and you quickly get to where you want to go. And you also know who the organization is. So I think it's pretty clear what their mission statement is. There's a lot of different design goals you might have. You might want to introduce yourself, highlight updates. They don't seem to have that much blogging going on, but that's probably fine. They just want you to get involved in person. Prompting for action, like signing up for an event or a newsletter. Telling stories, that might be more important for an individual blog or something where you're really trying to make a personal connection. And showing examples if you're doing a portfolio or something like that. I already showed you a bit of the customizer. If you are going to choose different themes, where you get them will depend on what system you're on. So for Classcaster, you can only choose from themes that Elmer's already approved. If you're on WordPress.com, they have some you have to pay for. So you might want to click on the free filter first. If you are on WordPress.org, you can download them. So that's a shot of some different designs that are in there. This is where I mentioned the company Automatic before. When I'm doing themes for our student organizations, I simplify my life by only downloading default themes or ones that they've designed, because then I know that they're absolutely going to be using best practices. So this one I'm using right now is the latest default theme, 2015. It comes with a lot of different customization options. You can make it look how you want. So for updates, I know they'll keep it updated. I know they're going to follow security best practices. Those are important to me because it means things I don't have to worry about. Some people like to go out there and find theme shops. There are a lot of people who are making money on WordPress. It's free software. They can do their own customizations and sell it. That's great. That's a good income stream. But if you're new to it, I wouldn't recommend starting with something you pay for. We had a faculty member who decided that he wanted something. He Googled lawyer themes and he found it and he paid for it and he wanted to use it. I started going through the code and I was like, somebody just took another person's code, slapped a few changes on it, put it up, and it has a completely different name in the back end, and I don't know, it's never going to get an update. And there are all of these things that were, it's using crappy code and I don't want to do this, but I couldn't find any security risks, so I decided to go ahead because I didn't want to have that argument with him. But if I was starting him from scratch, I would never let him just Google WordPress, because there are a lot of sites out there that have crappy code that become security risks, or can even have malicious code. It's running almost 25% of the web. If you want to hack people's sites, if you make something that looks pretty and they'll install it without thinking about it, that's a good way to get your code into their site. And it could do all kinds of things. So if you start with things from the WordPress.org repository, go to wordpress.org/themes, you'll find really nice sites, and they do actually review things. If you know the author, you can do a lot more. There are theme frameworks for people who really want to customize. That's what a lot of the developers who are making money do. They get something that gives them a basic layout, and then they add their own colors and functionality onto it. So if you really want to get into playing with it, that might save you some time. It's worth doing. If you want to customize themes, I already showed you the customizer. There are some things that you can't preview. For instance, some designs have different page layouts, so you might have one that has no sidebar. And when you're viewing it by default, it's going to show it with the sidebar. You have to go into that page and change a setting. And to do that, you can't do it from the customizer. So usually they'll have some documentation of like, once you get into the page, look for this format and change it there. If you want to do something where you're rearranging it, you find a theme you really like, but you don't love the fact that this goes all the way across, and you want two sidebars side by side and there's no setting for it, that's when you want to start creating a child theme. Because then you can take one block of code, even if you're not an expert in it, you can usually see, oh, this is sidebar, and this is header, and I want to put, or, footer, sidebar, and I just want to put them in opposite spots. And for the most part, that'll work. You just take one block of code and move it. If it's doing anything tricky with logic, you might have trouble. So if you're not a programmer, I recommend doing that somewhere where it's not going to break anything live, for sure. Never do that kind of thing live. But you can do it in your own spot and it won't be hard. So I have a child theme set up for this already. Let me get out of this folder. I'm going to the themes one. Come on. Oh, don't tell me it crashed because it's been hanging out. All right. So by default, I was using the 2015 theme. When I open that up, you'll find a whole bunch of different folders, files in there. So these are all the different templates and style sheets and different things like that that exist in it. When I open up my child theme here, you'll find two files. And neither of them have very much in it. The functions one says, hey, you should go back to the parent thing and get all the other stuff. I didn't have to write that code. I just went to the page that explains what a child theme is, and they're like, put this in a file named this, you're done. And then I found another example somewhere else because I wanted to add a different Google font for one section. And again, it's a copy and paste kind of thing. A lot of things you can do with child themes you don't have to be a programmer to do. For my style sheet, I just wanted to customize a few things, so I put in the different Google font compared to the one that they've been using, and then I made a few small changes. So I changed the background color, because that cross-out spot that I showed you was kind of hard to see, so I decided to make it gray in the background. For this kind of thing, you do need to have some sense of HTML, CSS type stuff. You don't have to do this, you just choose a different theme in general if you never want to get into code. But this is a good beginner way to get into it, because you can't break the existing site. You just turn this off and you're back to the default. The other difference is you won't ever upgrade your site and find that you've lost all of your customizations, which is not worth doing. Layout features, I showed you some of the areas that you can change. This is my header right now. Most people are familiar with this from looking at other websites. Menus, right now, it shows like this, and it closes, but if I open up the site, then it's over here on the sidebar. Widgets are anything else I decide to add over here, so I put my little block about me over here, and it pulled that in automatically from another service, which is nice. I didn't have to write it from scratch. If you want to have featured images, like this block that shows up at the top, that's something that comes with the design. If you really like having images, you think that's going to help people remember a site, you want to focus on one that lets you do that. Some of them, I've used that to create directories for student organizations. I went into more detail on that in my presentation last year, but I would have it so that it would show me a little blurb about the person with a small little thumbnail picture, and then when you click on it on the new page, it would show us a bigger picture with more text. I did that using featured images, and I could say on this page, get it in this size, in this page, get it in this size. The students just had to add it once, and the theme knew what to do with it. So you might find some designs do that. It thinks about it contextually, which can be really helpful instead of having to go through and like fiddle with settings. And I already mentioned excerpt versus full content. Excerpt is when you have one little blurb that shows by default. Widgets. I'm not going to go into all of the options, but in this site, we've got widgets over here on the side. They can appear sometimes in a sidebar or footer. Sometimes the home page is almost entirely made up of different customized widget areas. That can be a little complicated to figure out until you know that's what's happening. Adding new ones, themes and plugins often provide their own custom versions. And Jetpack, which I'll get to in just a second, lets you decide that I don't want this over here to display on my home page. So if I click on the title, guess what? It's much shorter because I said I want that to appear everywhere but here. So I find that kind of logic to be really helpful. Some of our student organizations make their own sub-menus for certain sections that get very complicated, and they don't want people to get lost in them. Doing drop-down menus or something, they just say, once you get into the complicated section, then we'll give you another menu on the site. There's a nice tutorial here that goes over the default ones. I mentioned images versus featured images. That's a featured image at the top. If I want to look at, this is an image that's inserted into the page. I already used galleries for this page. This automatically reset itself to display in a group just by saying, hey, put it in as a gallery. This is what's called a light box, where you can view it in more detail. So it doesn't matter how small it appears on the page, as soon as you click on it, there it is. That can be really helpful if you're doing like an event and you want to show a lot of pictures, but you don't want people to scroll forever. I can close that. Responsive design, I think I've already shown you that. Here's another example of a default WordPress theme that we set up for a bulletin, and we were testing it on all kinds of different tablets, big screens, small screens. Helps if you have a lot of screens. Functionality, it comes with plugins for the most part. You cannot install plugins on WordPress.com. Not allowed. Because they're running millions of websites. And they don't want to have to install everything. So when they come up with something that they want to add functionality, they add it to all the sites, but you can't turn it on or off, it's just there. WordPress.org, you install whatever you want. You do need to have admin, which is for an individual site, or super admin if you're running a site that can have multiple installations, which is what I use for the student organization. So because I have it set up that way, even on the test site where I give them more options, they can't decide to download more themes or plugins at all. They can only use the ones that I've installed, and that keeps my site more secure. Gives them full access to all of the settings on their site, but never to add new code to it. When you're running on local installation, plugins that want you to go to something on the web probably won't communicate the same way as if you're running on a server. So Jetpack is one I want to highlight because I find it just saves a lot of time. Elmer told me that he will have it on ClassCaster soon, but it's not there at the moment. Jetpack is a kind of bundle of plugins that was created by people at WordPress.com to add more functionality. And then they're like, we created all this, well, let's give it to people who want to run their own sites. So you install it once and you can turn on or off different settings. So when I clicked on the images and they appeared full screen, that was because I turned this on. If I wanted to add a Twitter box with my sidebar, I've turned this on, I haven't done that yet. If I wanted to add a YouTube video really quickly, this does that. When I had that gallery where it showed little pictures and a big picture next to it, that was that plugin. Widget visibility is what let me say, don't show this block on the home page. So a lot of these do very intuitive things that just make the site work better. But as you can see, there's also ones down here that I can't access right now. And that's because I'm running it on an individual computer. And the reason that they do this is they say, we're going to use our servers for you. And that's what Jetpack does, is it goes back to their servers and it says, for instance, things like post by email or monitor is what I use to tell that my service is up. They've got a program on their server that goes to your site and says, is it up? Is it up? Is it up? And it sends you an email if it's not. But since it's sending all those emails and things like that, emails especially, if you're doing a custom post or something, can sometimes bog things down. So these services do that for you. Also the post by email lets people, or subscribe by email. You'll see that on a lot of sites, and they check to see if a new post has been added, and then they send it out for you. So you don't have to do that. So there's a lot of great services within that they're worth looking at, but you can't see them on a test site, fortunately here. They also, one of the reasons I like to use it when I'm working with people, or like student organizations, is they hire the people who run this. So of all of the things out there that you can add onto your site, this is a really large team running it. And if it breaks, it's going to break on a lot of sites, and they're going to find out really quickly, and they're going to fix it really quickly. A lot of other customizations you add to your sites, it may be, one guy in a garage kind of thing. And it can be a great thing, and he can really know what he's doing, but if something comes up and it changes, especially for things like Twitter, where that's a separate company, and they're running all of their own code, and they're changing it all the friggin' time. If you've ever run a website where you had to have Twitter coming in, it breaks way more often than you think, because they're always tweaking it, and then all of a sudden the code that you've written, they grab stuff from them. So if you use something like this, where they've got a team of people that are on it, they're going to know about it earlier, and they're going to get it fixed compared to something else you might find. I am not going to go into all of these. I will show you where to get them later, but I have recommended plugins for different scenarios. So if you're running multiple authors and you want to have something to help you switch out between people and test what it looks like for them, or write an edit flow so you can have comments to each other that only show up on the back end, or you schedule it on a calendar and you say, you should get this done at this time. We're using that for the newsletter. Media, I want to be able to show documents. I have one that makes it very easy to do that. I want to be able to, there's actually one of my favorites, I'll show you the icon for it here. It's called My Eyes Are Up Here. And when you have featured images, as I do on this site, that are meant to be a certain size, if I put an image like this in, and it was a picture of a person, it's going to crop to the middle. Half the time that's like this, which looks really stupid. So if I want to say crop it, but show their head, it lets me click on the head, and if it's faces, it'll automatically detect it. So that's one of those things, it's like one little annoying thing fixed. That's what a lot of plugins do. And you can't run plugins like that on WordPress.com. So if you're going to do that, you might have to pre-crop your image, image editing process, and then put it up. Kind of a pain in the neck, but possible. Stats and SEO, some of these are built in, so Jetpack has some of this. So again, that's going to be available to even call it WordPress.com stats. But if you want to get more advanced, some of these you'll need to set up Google Webmaster Analytics first, but that'll give you more information on like what kind of device are they using, which is useful if you need to know, do I need to make this look really good for a phone because everybody seems to be using this for a phone? Google Analytics will tell you that. WordPress.com stats won't. There are other types of backend content. Broken link checker. If you're linking to other things all the time and you want to know that your site is working, that'll give you a report. RSS aggregator is fun. How many of you out here have ever heard of Yahoo Pipes? This is kind of a back in the day thing. All right, are you finding it doesn't work anymore? That's what we're finding. This is fun if you're using WordPress. You can go out there and find RSS feeds and paste them all in. So when I set up all the student orgs, I set up one page that says, go find all of them and post them in order of the update, not by grouping by site. So I have one updates page that just shows me everything that has been recently posted to all of those. And all I had to do was go and get the RSS link for each of them and paste it into this service. So I think that makes it almost possible to set up an automated site where I don't even need content. We've got a few other people who are doing that. They're setting up a local organization. They're like, each of the members of this organization has their own like company blog. Rather than us having a blog, let's just dump all of theirs on our front page. It's like, okay, I have a tool for that. This is going to work. I have plugins here for backup. Some of these you have to pay for, but it lets you dump it into like Dropbox or something like that that might be useful for a shared service. Some of them are free. There are plugins for security. If you're running a site that runs 25% of the web, the software, it's going to be targeted. That doesn't mean, and you'll see articles every once in a while in the news that are like, WordPress is totally, you know, a target for all of these hackers and all of WordPress is hacked and blah, 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 all these millions of sites out there are dying. It's not really true. Usually it's somebody installed a plugin that didn't get updated and they found a security leak in that. There are very few actual hacks to the core code. So that's one reason to be careful of what you install. So I have a couple recommended here, both for plugins and for themes, that let you check when you install it whether it has vulnerabilities in it. Obviously, you have to keep everything up to date too. That's the biggest thing to do. Most of the WordPress community has people that if they do find a security risk, they will go to the person who wrote it and tell them to fix it before they will tell the whole world. Every once in a while, you get some dumbass who finds a problem and tells the whole world. Well, thanks. Now everybody who's mean can find that and use it. Training resources beyond me. There's a lot of great stuff from WordPress. The codex has examples like that child theme that I showed you that I just copied and pasted stuff. WordPress.tv if you learn best by videos. WordCamps are out there. They submit all of their videos. You get great content if you like learning that way. Or you can attend a WordCamp. There are a lot of sites out there that are offering training. And some of these have videos. Others do kind of roundups of other resources. I personally find it useful to have a few email newsletters that come to me on a daily or weekly basis, just so I don't have to set up an RSS reader. I scan through those in the morning and archive them if I don't have time, and now I can go back to them. And I can kind of search in my email for stuff I've sent to myself or those newsletters. Facebook groups. I know Twitter has great content. I'll be honest, I only use Twitter at conferences like this, so I don't have a list for that, but I do use Facebook all the time. So I found those to be really helpful. One thing I'll say about Facebook groups, they're usually targeted. And they'll get annoyed with you if you go in there and without Googling it, which I'm sure nobody here would ever do, are just like, I have a problem, guys. And then they don't post links and they don't check to see what other people have suggested. They're great resources if you're willing to look and see what other people have already posted. I keep track of that all the time. A lot of the tools that I've recommended here actually came from some Facebook groups that I found. And there are other resources outside of this. These are things I use when I'm customizing. So in Chrome, if I am looking at, let's say, something like this, and I'm like, you know what, I want to put this in here. I click on inspect element, and I can dig right in and see where that is. Okay, I want that picture. You know, copy link address, whatever. Or I want to figure out what level heading this is, so I can change my CSS and make that one thing not bold. Click on inspect element, and all right, maybe I would take entry title instead of heading 1, paste that into my CSS and say, you know, make that normal instead of bold. So that makes it really easy, and you can preview it in here. So if you're like, you know what, that size is a little off. I think it would look better if it were slightly smaller. I can click right into it and preview what it would look like. That does not change anything on the actual site, that's just a preview. It's very helpful if you're just getting started in CSS and you're not used to getting into code at all. Do this, it doesn't change anything, but you can see how it's put together. And it's really helpful too because you can kind of move your mouse around over here and see how the code is structured too. Now you're looking at the HTML that's generated, not the PHP, so if you actually went into the files, you wouldn't see it looking just like this, but it does give you something that you can look for. I also use an eyedropper tool, so if I'm trying to grab colors from a photo, I can do that. I won't find that in the code, but I could say, hey, I want to use this color from better and make it match. There are amazing free design tools out there. A lot of the images that I use, like this lovely toolbox cake I found from Flickr, which our Dashing speaker already talked about quite a bit. I use Icon Archive sometimes. Google Fonts exists, there's other tools out there. There are sites out there that help you find out if you find another WordPress site, You can type that URL into build with or WordPress theme search, and it'll tell you how they made it. It won't tell you everything, because some things only occur on the back end and they don't have access to that. It'll show you a lot. So you'll have a sense of, oh, they're using that maybe, and maybe that plugin for that page. I can go copy that, thank you. If you're sharing things, Facebook Image Debugger is super helpful for if I wanted to share this specific page, and when I share it, I don't get that nice icon at the top. I just paste this link in there, and it'll force Facebook to come look at it again and find all the information. So if I've edited my page a few times, that's really helpful. I do social media for our school, so I'm using that all the time, and not just for WordPress things. I already mentioned some of the Google Webmaster things that'll give you more details, and the Wayback Machine is helpful if you ever need to find an earlier version that somebody edited a page. You do have to make sure your site is actually in the Internet Archive first, but once it's in there, if you're ever like, somebody took information down, how did they do that? I need that back. And let's say they figured out a way to leave the information in this document or something like that they just took out. It's always helpful to know those things exist. I also have a few tips in here to help you do a manual backup, transfer, or troubleshooting. I'm going to do one of these right now. Go into Tools, I'm going to do an export. This will pull all of the content except for the images into a file that can then be put anywhere else. So I'm going to call this CALI presentation. And I can take this file and then upload it into Glasscaster or one of my test sites, and I can add that link to, and this content to my presentation page. And if any of you want to use all of this, you can also just download that export, put it into a blank site, and you'll have my content right there in WordPress where you can play with it. I have a couple tweaks to do. The one thing that doesn't happen very easily from a local site to a live site is it doesn't pull the images by default and put them into that file. It just pulls the text, and then it goes and it looks for it. So if I gave you this file right now, you wouldn't have access to my computer because it's only running on my computer. So I need to do one more thing to make sure that works for you. So I'll get that out shortly. But I hope this was helpful. I know I talked for a long time. I tried to ask questions at the beginning so that I could gear the talk towards where you were coming from. So I hope that was true. If you have more questions, feel free to contact me individually too, though. Anything else I can add?